fanboys really are something else because they're always jumping the gun, they're always putting their foot in it, and they never seem to learn. Such is the case with this Tyson Fury, Derek Chisora situation. Because in recent weeks, we've heard from Eddie Hearn and several boxing news websites that an offer had been made by Team Fury to Derek Chisora for a fight at the back end of this year. Now, I saw in the past few days Tyson Fury fans in the comment section of various videos dismissing all this, saying that Team Fury have already said that it's not true. Tyson's not going to fight Chisora a third time. This has all been made up by Matchroom and Eddie Hearn to try and make Tyson look bad. This is literally what they've been saying over the past few days. Unfortunately, they're ending up with egg on their face as fanboys, and I'm not just picking on the Fury fanboys here, the fanboys of any fighter, AJ fanboys, Fury, whatever. They're ending up with egg on their face again because their hero, the Gypsy King, has come out publicly and implored Derek Chisora to sign the contract. Now, why is this an issue for the likes of me and many other boxing fans out there? It's an issue because on one hand, Tyson Fury says he won't come out of retirement to fight Usyk unless he gets $500 million, that is, or some ridiculous amount of money. He says he's retired. And then he also says Anthony Joshua, he won't fight him. You know, Fury won't fight Joshua unless it's all for free. I mean, he's making these ridiculous demands to fight the top tier guys. But then he'll turn around and say, sign the contract, Derek. Well, I thought you were retired, Tyson. Why would you be so keen on fighting Derek Chisora, a guy who's levels and levels below you, a guy you've already beaten twice, a guy who is really at the back end of his career? Now, I'm sure the Fury fanboys will say, well, there's a personal grudge, and this is about honor and respect, and Chisora disrespected him because he picked Dillian Whyte to beat him. Well, you might be foolish enough to fall for such nonsense, but not all of us are. I know that Tyson Fury is a hell of a fighter, but he's also a hell of a manager. And I'm talking about managing himself. I know he was with MTK, right? I don't know what his official management situation is now, but he has the final say, I think anyway, in terms of who he fights. He's a very shrewd operator. People are going to say, well, everyone said he was avoiding Dillian Whyte, but look what happened when they fought. Dillian Whyte was a mandatory. He didn't pick Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte was put upon him. He wasn't in any rush to fight Dillian Whyte at all. They could have fought something like a year before they actually did. That's facts. For the WBC Diamond Belt, Tyson Fury decided to not go through with that. He eventually did fight Dillian Whyte as a mandatory because he had to, but only after Dillian Whyte had been sparked out by Povetkin 2 fights before. Right? He was knocked out worse by Povetkin in terms of the knockout itself, not what happened before the knockout, but the knockout he suffered against Povetkin was worse than the knockout against Fury. It was a more devastating punch. He got up against Fury. Against Povetkin, he was done. So things have to be put in their proper context. Yes, he beat Dillian Whyte, but he beat him because he had to fight him for one, and he was fighting a guy who didn't appear to be the same or didn't appear to be as dangerous as he was a couple fights previous because he hadn't shown that level of vulnerability. Yeah, he'd shown some vulnerability, but he hadn't been sparked out, you know? Excuse me. So Fury is a guy who's careful about who he fights and when he fights them. And I think that's what he's doing right now. He's being careful about who he fights and when he fights them. And he's always got some clever excuse up his sleeve for the occasional cherry pick that he comes out with, or more than occasional. In this instance, Derek Chisora. Oh, well, I've got a personal grudge. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that Derek needs to be taught a lesson because he betrayed our friend. You know, all this crap that I'm sure he's going to try and come out with if he goes ahead with the fight. How many of you are really going to buy that? Voluntary defense for Tyson Fury, if he's the best in the division, he should be fighting the Andy Ruizes of the world. He should be fighting the Joseph Parker. I know Joseph Parker is pretty much just a Tyson Fury fanboy. But he should be fighting the Joseph Parkers of the world. He should be fighting the Philip Hergoviches of the world. Even the Joe Joyces of the world. These are the guys Fury should be getting in there with. Not Derek Chisora for a voluntary defense. No. That's what you call a cherry pick. That's what you call a guy trying to hoodwink the public. You know? So I don't want to see that. I much prefer the talk from Bob Arum and from even Frank Warren to some degree of Fury fighting Joyce. Obviously, Joyce has got this Joseph Parker fight. We don't know whether he's actually going to win that. If he loses, is Parker really going to fight Fury? I doubt it. If Joyce wins, hopefully we get Joyce versus Fury. If Fury ain't going to fight in the undisputed fight next, but really and truly, if Fury was serious about cleaning out the division, because he hasn't done that, despite what some people might try and gaslight you into thinking, if he was serious about it, he'd be keeping his diary free at the back end of the year. He wouldn't be trying to arrange fights with Derek Chisora. He'd be keeping that diary free. So whoever wins out of AJ and Usyk can settle the score and decide who actually is the best heavyweight in the division, let's say in December, November, December time. Perfectly reasonable, right? Because you got AJ and Usyk fighting in August this month, September, October, back end of November or into December. Plenty of time there. It all depends on how the fight goes. If it's crazy tough and there's multiple knockdowns and all that kind of thing, then maybe the winner, if they've taken a lot of punishment, would need even longer than that. But if it's similar to the last fight, let's say Usyk wins again, and it's a similar situation to the last fight in terms of the amount of punishment he takes, then he'll be ready again in 3 months. Yeah? So if Fury is what he says he is, and he might be what he says he is in terms of being that good and being the number one, but I'm not someone who is impressed by a guy just talking and being clever about who he fights and when he fights them. I want him to get in there and fight all the elite guys, all the top guys, the guys he hasn't faced so far, and prove that he is who he says he is. Back up all the boasts. And that's when I'll give him the credit. So I give him credit for beating Dillian Whyte, but again, in context, the guy who'd just been knocked out 2 fights before. A guy who, in retrospect, maybe Dave Allen was right, because going into the fight, Dave Allen said Dillian Whyte has been on the decline for a couple years. That was his opinion going into the fight. Maybe he was right. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe Dillian Whyte was better in the Fury fight than he had been, let's say, 3-4 years ago. But his punch resistance certainly wasn't better. I'll say that. Either way, I'll give him credit. He did beat Dillian Whyte. That was one of the top contenders in the division, but he's not the only contender. And if you think about Dillian Whyte, how many of you would pick Whyte to beat Hergovich? I wouldn't pick him to beat Hergovich. How many of you would pick Dillian Whyte to beat Joe Joyce? I don't think I'd pick him over Joyce. How many of you would pick Dillian Whyte at this stage to beat Joseph Parker? I wouldn't pick him in a Parker fight right now. How many of you would pick him even over Daniel Dubois? To me, that's touch and go. I could see how even now Dillian Whyte could win, but I could also easily see how he loses as well. So, again, not taking anything away from Fury, but there are many, many other dangerous fighters in the division. Andy Ruiz is a guy who I've always felt would beat Dillian Whyte, even when Dillian Whyte was at his absolute best. I've been saying that for years. So there are lots of other guys out there for Tyson Fury to fight. If he is this generation's Muhammad Ali, then he needs to get out there and fight these guys, because that's what Ali did. Ali fought everybody in his era. He left no stone unturned. Will Tyson Fury do the same? I hope so. I'm not holding my breath, but I hope so. Fighting the likes of Derek Chisora in a trilogy fight at the back end of this year, that's not a good look, people. If you're going to be objective, and I know for the Fury fanboys that's impossible, but for anybody else, if you're going to be objective, a Derek Chisora trilogy fight is not a step in the right direction, is it? How can you possibly say, I'm retired and, I'll only fight AJ if it's free, and I'll only fight Usyk for $500 million, and I don't need to come back and blah, blah, and then you're going to go and fight Derek Chisora. Come on. Is he trolling or what? Or is he actually trying to do like what he did when he fought Tom Schwartz? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.